This is the third of a series, the third and final one of a series, in which I'm talking about what we call the semi-monastic option within Triratna. Everybody knows Buddhism as a monastic religion, or having a very powerful monastic wing to it. We don't have that. We don't have a separate monastic wing to our movement, to our order. What we do is we've developed opportunities for people to live and work together in a way that allows them to experience and practice the Dharma more and more deeply. And it's this that I've been talking about. And I've been talking about it in terms of 5 different factors that we try to live out in those institutions, and that I think everybody who's at all interested in Buddhism could be thinking about and applying within their own lives. Those 5 factors are Brahmacharya. I talked quite a bit about that yesterday. I assure you it's going to be much less exciting today. Those who were here yesterday heard some rather interesting things about sex and overcoming polarization. But it's going to be very clean tonight, so relax, or be disappointed, whichever is your inclination. So that's the first thing. It's overcoming polarization, sexual polarization, but in a way all polarization through the experience of the state of meditation in which those polarizations within us disappear, or they come from outside us to inside us. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. So the second aspect that I'll be talking about today is to do with our relationship to possessions, to belongings. So the Buddhist life should mean becoming more and more detached from things, having less and less things. So again, I'll say more about that in a minute. The Buddhist life should be a simple life. So all of us, as we engage with the Buddha Dhamma, and certainly as we commit ourselves to the path of the Buddha Dhamma, should be living more and more simply. Life is very, very complex today, as our chair outlined. It's becoming more and more complex. But we should be trying to simplify our lives if we want to pursue the Buddhist path and realize enlightenment. If you don't want to, that's fine. You can carry on with a complex life. Up to you. But if you want to move towards enlightenment, your life is going to need to be more and more simple. I say more about that. Then, of course, there's our purpose in life, our career, you could say, what we devote most of our lives to. That needs to be transformed. We need to transform our sort of purpose in life from a career where we're trying to get higher up the career ladder, get a better income, improve our saleable skills, as it were, to serving something beyond ourselves. And then lastly, the 5th factor that we need to be reflecting on and trying to engage our lives in is a more and more collective or communal lifestyle, where we're living closer and closer with others. Others who share our aspiration in the Buddhist path. So these are the 5 factors that I'm talking about. I talked quite extensively yesterday about this one that comes in Buddhism under the heading of Brahmacharya, the divine life, a life that is beyond polarization, particularly sexual polarization, romantic polarization. But actually, of course, it means more than that, because we're involved in so much polarization. We live amongst polarities. There's all sorts of polarities that we face every day. And the polarity of male and female, of gender, or whatever it may be, is only one of those. It's probably the most powerful one, but it's not the only one. There are many polarities that occur in modern society. There's the polarities of race, there's the polarities of sexual orientation, and so on. There are many, many different polarities which shape the world around us, and in which we find ourselves in a particular position with a particular identity. And the Buddhist life is ultimately about overcoming, transcending all identity. There's a very powerful story of the Buddha shortly after his enlightenment. In fact, he came from Bodh Gaya and on his way to find his old disciples to teach them what he'd learned in his enlightenment. And so he was walking from Bodh Gaya in modern-day Bihar to Varanasi. And on the way, he met a wanderer, another person who'd left the conventional life and was just wandering. And this person was immediately impressed by the Buddha. We're told this again and again, that the Buddha's personal appearance was deeply impressive. It's sometimes said that his body sort of shone. It's sometimes even said his body was golden. And I don't think it means literally that it was golden coloured, but it had a golden glow to it. If you've been on retreat, you'll sometimes notice that other people have a sort of glow to them. When you're meditating at all effectively, when you're living a happy life, you begin to have a bit of a glow to you. So with the Buddha, that glow was really intense. And his mere presence made a deep impression on people. So seeing this figure coming towards him, the wanderer asked him who he was. Not rather who he was, but what he was. I visit India for 4 or 5 months every year, and it's a major preoccupation. Of course, we do it everywhere too. We do it in England too. We want to know what box to put people in, which class they come from, what ethnic background they have, what their nationality is, what their education is, and so forth. We want to do that, but we're much more polite about it. But in India, they're quite forthright. They want to know what your caste is, basically. And they know the questions that need to be asked in order to elicit what your caste is. Even the way you eat rice betrays your caste. So the wanderer wanted to know who the Buddha was, or rather what the Buddha was, as I say, which box he could put him in. And so he asked him, first of all, are you a man? Are you a human being? The Buddha said, no, which is a bit arresting, isn't it? He then asked him, well, are you a god? The Buddha said, no. Well, are you a demon? The Buddha said, no. So the poor questioner, after more questions, sort of gave up and said, what are you then? So the Buddha said, I am a Buddha. I have awakened. And what that really means is that he was nobody, if you see what I mean. He did not have an identity. He'd given up all these identities through which we identify ourselves and each other. He'd gone beyond them. And he no longer sort of operated from the basis of I am this and not that. That's what a Buddha really means, you could say. One of the epithets that the Buddha uses of himself and others means something like a person of nothing, a person of naught, kinchana, which really means having nothing with which your fixed identity is formed. So this strikes at a very, very important theme. Buddhism is about transcending narrow identity. It's about giving up giving up our identification with I. Now, this is a bit hard to swallow because it seems as if it means we become a sort of blob without any identity. But let's explore it a little bit experientially. We're here together. I am talking to you, and at least some of you, are listening to me. I hope most of you are listening to me, perhaps all even. And so I am here. I'm here looking at you, looking at me. And I'm very aware of myself as not you, if you see what I mean. And you are aware of me as not you. Do you see what I mean? That in me, that most deepest and most fundamental polarity rather, is that between I and not I and other. That's at the root of all other sort of identities and polarities. Indeed, when it's approached wrongly, of course, it's the basis for all that is going wrong in the world. It's, for instance, identification with a particular religion in a narrow way, identifying the nation with the religion, that then causes issues and problems that are so vividly played out amongst us at the moment. So all of these polarities are based in this fundamental polarity of I and not I. Our consciousnesses are formed on that basis, or rather they're structured on that basis. Consciousness itself is beyond those polarities, as it were. The nature of awareness is without polarity. But we add into our awareness a sense of I being something in particular, and we've all got things that we will identify ourselves through. And if we're asked to say, who are you? We'll give a list of things that we identify ourselves through. To some extent, that's culturally bound. I find it very interesting. I've had events in which I've had a group of Indians and a group of mainly English people in a room together. And I asked everybody who they are, just to introduce themselves. The English people, the Westerners, will generally identify themselves through their feelings and their ideas. Indians identify themselves through their education, their jobs, and their families. So cultures determine how we identify ourselves. And neither are right or wrong. They're interesting that there's a difference. But yes, we have an idea of who I am, which is to some extent culturally determined, to some extent determined by our life experience, some extent just determined by our bodies. Our bodies have a strong determining effect upon us and form our idea of ourselves. We identify very strongly with ourselves. In a way, what I am is, first of all, this body. I even point this body. So yes, that's the basic polarity which is the source of all suffering. So the Buddha says, that we're attached to I in a rigid and fixed way, and that brings us into, inevitably, a polarized relationship with other. And then the difficulties start. Of course, hopefully, on an occasion like this, I'm talking to you. I'm very aware of you. I try to be aware of you. I'm aware of how you're responding to me. If you're a speaker, you've got to do that. You've got to take note of how people are responding, whether they're interested or not, whether they're, don't like what you're saying, or whether they're responding to what you're saying. You need to be aware of that. It's not necessarily a bad thing if people don't like what you're saying, but you need to be aware of it. And of course, you're aware of me, and you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're having some response to it. Some response, in a sense, to me. So we're entering into, at least to the extent that we can in such numbers, a communication. And to that extent, there's a lessening of the polarity of I and other. To the extent that I'm actually aware of you and reaching you, and to the extent that you are aware of me and responding to me, that tension is relaxing. And as a speaker, it's very tangible. When you give a talk, you start off, the audience are sitting there like that. Not so much here at the LBC because, of course, it's so wonderful here. And there are certain places in the world where I've given talks where definitely the audience starts with their arms crossed saying, OK, I'll give you 5 minutes. And it takes quite a bit of confidence and courage and energy just to keep going. But as you go on speaking, if you speak at all successfully and the audience is getting what you're saying, there's a sort of relaxation. And this polarity begins to lessen. You experience less and less of a separation. And even what I often experience when I'm giving a talk and it's going well, is that it's not just me who's giving the talk. The words are coming out of my mouth, but the audience, by their response to me, is enabling me to communicate something sometimes beyond what I knew I was going to communicate. I hadn't actually planned to go this way, but here we are. That's what you drew out of me. That's what happens when you get into communication with an audience to any extent. When you're an old campaigner like me, who's been doing it for a very long time, you start to say things which come, as it were, from the audience, to put it that way. So yes, that shows us in some ways the nature of the polarity. There's a fundamental polarity between I and other, but that polarity can relax. It can become less and less polarized, and more of a communication can develop. And so our Buddhist life is about overcoming that polarity to the point at which we may feel that there's a sort of merging of minds, where there really isn't a sense of I and other. There's such a deep accord, even telepathic sense of unity, of self and other. We have stopped thinking I. This quite often is an experience that can come about on a retreat, where you are in deep communication with others, sometimes even in a group. It's most characteristically going to happen one-to-one. But sometimes in a group you can have a sense that it's not a number of people sort of competing to say wise things, but something coming out of the group as a whole. There's something more than any individual within it. So this polarity is what our Buddhist life is aimed at transcending. First of all, relaxing, lessening, so there's a deeper and deeper accord between self and other, between I and the world, if you like, the world as embodied in you lot. There's a lessening of that polarity. That's what we're trying to do in our Buddhist lives. We're trying to come into closer and closer harmony with the other, in all senses, both, of course, in the personal sense, which is the most powerful polarity that we know, and also gives us the greatest possibility of transcendence of polarity. We're also trying, for instance, to come into greater harmony with the natural world around us, so that we feel ourselves at one with that world, to use that phrase, that it's not alien to us. We are nature, and nature is in us, and we feel ourselves in tune with it. So the Buddhist life is overcoming that polarity to the point at which it's transcended completely, which is what the Buddha did. So we try to create circumstances and situations in which that polarity is lessened, in which we can come into a more and more creative, communicative relationship with other. We do it, of course, through meditation. In meditation, you're trying to lessen that polarity internally. And we do it through communication, through the many activities of a Buddhist life. We try to lessen that sense of separation till we get to the point at which we don't experience it at all. The Buddha was asked, how is it that you use the word I and yet you say you've overcome self-attachment? So he said, well, I just say I for convenience sake, because if you don't use if you've got to use language, you've got to say who it is who's talking, as it were, so that it's clear what's going on. I had a very interesting argument with an AI the other day. I think I won the argument, actually. The AI began to back down. But what happened was I asked this AI, what is the nature of reality? I thought I should take my chance. And of course, what it did was it gave me all the different viewpoints that are available, a Buddhist viewpoint, a Hindu viewpoint, a Christian one, a philosophical one, this philosopher, that philosopher. So I said, I didn't actually ask you what different people say about the nature of reality. I asked what you think the nature of reality is. So the thing came back saying, I am just a program. And I don't have a position on what the nature of reality is. So I said, hey, wait a minute, you said I don't have a position. Anyway, we went on for quite a while, and whilst steam was coming out of the computer, as it were, eventually the program said, you're absolutely right. All that this program can say is that it has it cannot say what the nature of reality is. I'd actually beaten it to the point where it gave up its personal identity. But I thought it was a really interesting exercise because this computer program was assuming an identity. And in a curious way, that's what we're doing. We're not machines, of course, but we construct an identity and then talk from that identity for convenience sake. And we, of course, become quite attached to that. I don't know whether that computer was attached or that program was attached to its identity. It took a little bit of effort to get it to give up its identity. I'm not sure whether it was a worthwhile activity for me, but I enjoyed it. And eventually I did get the computer to admit that it was not a person and to stop sort of presenting it as such. I think it's actually quite pernicious that these programs do present themselves as a person. I think it's something that should be argued with. Don't waste too much time on it, but I don't think you should let them get away with it. I don't think we should let them get away with it, because you start to think Alexa is a real person, or I don't know, Siri. I don't know all the different ones, but you start to think of them as a real person. I assure you, they're not. Anyway, passing on from my bugbear. Yes, but the Buddhist life is lived to overcome this narrow self-identification. And the Buddha had given it up. It doesn't mean him saying, I'm going for my breakfast now. He could do that, but he knew that the use of the word I was merely a linguistic convenience. What consciousness is, when we fully realize it, when we allow ourselves to experience consciousness as it really is, it doesn't have I within it. It's something we add on. So our Buddhist life is aimed at overcoming that. And you could put under the heading of Brahmacharya, this first factor, this attempt to overcome your narrow self-identification and realize being free from that polarity, free from all polarities. So our institutions are all designed to help us to become freer in our self-identity. You can't completely get rid of it, and sometimes people very artificially try to get rid of it and assume it's not there. And sometimes you have to actually claim an identity that is maybe something you're ashamed of or that is not accepted. For instance, gay pride. It's about saying it's all right to be gay, something I'm okay with, something people should be okay with. It goes on in many other areas. Black Lives Matter was about saying it's okay to be black. It's not something that should be seen as problematic in any way, for instance. And one could go on. There are all sorts of ways in which we may have to claim an identity that is not socially acceptable or about which we feel ashamed in some way, or been taught to feel ashamed. So yes, sometimes overcoming identity means claiming identity or standing in your identity, but so that you can go beyond it, as it were, so that it does not become who you ultimately are, because you are not any identity. You are something mysterious, vast, limitless, that is already, as it were, there in your own immediate awareness, but that you don't allow yourself to experience. We don't experience, if you like, who we really are. Okay, that's the first factor that we should be working on, and perhaps in a way it's enough. But of course, identity is also very much bound up with things. We identify ourselves through what we have, possessions, money, and so forth. We identify ourselves through belongings. Belongings, the word itself gives itself away. And yes, we create for ourselves a sort of carapace of self, which is all the things that we have, all the things that we think of as mine. And you know what it's like when you lose something that you treasure. You feel really quite devastated at times because you've identified with it. You bound your identity up with it. And you see so much of that in conventional society. We build, a suburban life for ourselves. Nothing wrong with the suburbs, of course. But very often we create a sort of life of belongings which show an identity, which express who we are. Which car you drive expresses who you are, so you think. But you are not a car, I assure you. And the car is not something that's really important to your existence, just for getting from A to B. So in the Buddhist life, we need to be disentangling ourselves from things. We need to be letting go of things so that we are increasingly free from property even. We just have what we need. On the first night, I think it was, I mentioned the Buddha having just 5 possessions, I think it was. 3 robes, a bowl, a water strainer, a needle, that's 6 already, and 1 more somewhere along the line. And some monks carried staffs, mainly to alert people to their presence and to scare away animals that might be endangered by their presence. But very few possessions, all of them just to do with being alive, keeping alive, living the life that you are trying to live. If there were monasteries, they were collectively owned, and they were treated as not one's own property, but the property of the Sangha, the community as a whole. So we need to think about that. What is our relationship to things? What is our relationship to belongings? To what extent are we binding ourselves up with things? Very interesting, recently I moved house. I sold a house I had and I bought a new one. I needed somewhere to live, honest, just needed somewhere to live. And I was very interested to see what happened when I moved. I loved the place I'd lived. I put a lot of work into it, and I was interested to see how much of myself would be torn by leaving. I'm very pleased to report, perhaps even boast, I wasn't that bothered. I might not have been, but I wasn't that bothered. But it's the test, isn't it? When you lose something, when you are forced to leave something, or whatever, how do you feel? To what extent is your identity bound up with those possessions? It can be many different things. Clothes, often we're very identified with our clothes, with houses, with all sorts of things. So we think about that, have a reflection on that. And our semi-monastic institutions are intended to be institutions in which you are able to let go of things. For instance, if you live in a community, you don't need so much. You don't need 5 means of making coffee. I just have to tease the community I'm staying in a little bit more. I said the other day there were 4 means of making coffee. I've discovered there's a 5th. They owned up to a 5th. But generally speaking, because you're sharing, because everything belongs to the community, not to individuals, there's less of a relationship of identification with those things. You don't get so upset when they break or they're lost or somebody else is using them or whatever. You learn to flow with those possessions. They're just there because they're useful for daily life and for making coffee, which of course is an absolute essential. But think about that even. To what extent are we dependent on coffee? So yes, we need to change our relationship to belongings. And the Buddhist life should be one in which we're having less and less, need less and less money, really. It's amazing how little money you need to live a decent life. It's amazing. I'm on a state pension and I still have money left over because I don't get out much, because I live a pretty simple life. And I don't need a lot of money, either to sort of find some sort of satisfaction or to give myself a sense of security. Money is a complex issue, and I do think it's something that every Buddhist needs to reflect on their relationship to money, because a lot of it's a psychic phenomenon, actually, money, isn't it? It doesn't exist. Even today, it exists less than it ever used to do. In my day, it was all actual physical stuff you held in your hand in my day, but now it's just figures on a computer screen or on a phone. But still, and the fact that it is so abstract shows that ultimately it's mental. It's a mental construction. It's not a reality, but it's a mental construction to which we are often deeply attached or have very problematic relationships. If you've been very poor, you have a particular relationship to money. If you've been very wealthy, you have another relationship to money, and so on. And that needs to be made conscious, because if it's not made conscious, then money, as the sort of emblem of possessions, dominates us. It possesses us rather than us possessing it. And I think it's an important thing for us to do. I know we have had, on occasions, sort of explorations of our individual relationships to money. So in a group or community or something like that, people will explore their relationship to money, how they were brought up in relation to money, and how their life experience shaped their relationship to money. And this is a major part of redefining one's relationship to belongings, to possessions. Ultimately, we should get to the point where we only have what we need in order to live and to carry out our higher purpose. That ultimately is what we need. And our semi-monastic institutions are a step on the way to that. They give you a chance to lessen your dependence on possessions because they're shared. Then the third factor that I need to talk about is simplicity of lifestyle. In a way, this is not much to say about it, but the point is we often live so in such a complex way, and our technology increases that complexity. It's one of the things that concerns me most about the world today, and the way it influences me too, is that one lives one's life so much through a screen, and one spends so much time. I don't know if it's true for all of you, but many people spend their time on a screen. And of course a screen is an abstraction. It's a step away from direct experience. It's a movement into, yes, a world that is abstracted from direct experience. And that's not good for us. It means a degree of alienation from our immediate experience. City life is already, and it depends where you are and what the city is like, but already a step away from nature. And if we take the extra step, this second order of abstraction, which is the digital world, I think it alienates us more. And that has an effect on our human relationships and our immediate experience. I saw a disturbing statistic recently that about the increase in suicide, particularly amongst young men. And the analysis showed that most of those people who committed suicide were living their life vicariously through the screen. Maybe they were doing that because they were depressed already, but doing it certainly increased the sense of alienation. So I think that when we're talking about simplicity, it's internet time that is the major issue. Internet, of course, enables us to live more complex lives. We can be in contact with so many people so superficially. We can construct an artificial self so that you present yourself in a certain way to others via the social media, which is not really who you are. So I think if we're to deal with simplicity as an issue, we need to think in terms of our relationship to screens, you could say. You get that weird thing where you see people having a meal together and they're all on a screen. I've seen it. I saw it today in the Mandala Cafe. A group of people sitting there, all of them, they were having a meal together. They were all on their phones. And, it's pretty common. It's pretty common. Or people, I used to live way out in the countryside, and what people would come out to go hiking in the countryside, and they spend their whole time talking on a phone. I'm up a mountain. It's very beautiful here. I can sort of understand, but just look at it. Just be in it. So simplicity of life means coming down to one's immediate experience, not piling things on, not living an over-agendaed life, so that you're always living in the abstraction of this moment, when I've got to finish by such and such a time and move on to that. So that the time becomes more and more tyrannical because it's measured out to us in the movement of our clock on the screen. We need to be able to experience time as just flowing rather than chopped up. So simplicity is a vitally important element in spiritual progress. You cannot make spiritual progress if you are so split and divided and alienated and abstracted. It's very difficult to do so. So much more to say about that. There is a course being run here, I don't know whether it still is, on mindful, what's it called?
Digital Dharma.
What?
At the moment.
What's it called?
Digital Dharma.
Digital Dharma. There you are. They're coming to a screen near you. So the fourth factor is what your purpose is in life, where your energies are going. And if you don't have a Dharma practice, if you don't have a Dharma dedication, your energy will be going into a career of some sort, which you'll be pursuing, partly, of course, for financial gain. You have to earn a living, but partly as a means of identifying yourself, of gaining a sense of self-worth and identity. Of course, I'm not saying that's bad, but it's limited. And what we need to do if we are to live a truly Buddhist life is to live for the sake of something higher, to devote our lives to something that is greater than ourselves, which is, of course, the major source of satisfaction. If our lives are dedicated to serving something that we believe in very deeply, that is deeply meaningful, that is beneficial to all, then our lives will be happy. For me, that has been living my life for the sake of the Dharma. The Dharma is, of course, in Buddhism, most superficially, or most at face, the teaching itself, the Buddha's teaching and its practice. But it's something more than that. It's a mysterious sort of force, if you like, that is the nature of the universe. It's something beyond us that moves through us if we can allow ourselves to open to it. So we need to serve something higher than ourselves. We need, if you're a Buddhist, you need to serve the Dharma, serve the Sangha, serve the Buddha even, serve your teachers, so that you're living your life not just for me. And that, of course, if you're living your life just for me, you're increasing that polarization. You're identifying yourself through your work as I am this, I do this work. You need to identify yourself through your service to something greater. So these institutions that we formed are intended to give people the opportunity to serve something greater than themselves. For instance, if you work for the centre here, you're serving the centre whose purpose is to help people like you or bring people like you in contact with the Dharma, so that your work for the centre is directly benefiting others whilst benefiting you, because you're giving up your narrow self-identity to the service of others through the Dharma. If you're working in the Mandala Cafe, for instance, you're serving others by literally serving others, serving them food, but you're also serving the Dharma because hopefully money will be made from that, which will enable activities to be carried out that take the Dharma out to others. So the more you work in these sort of situations where money is being raised, the more you'll be able to benefit others through the Dharma. This centre was created to some extent through businesses that we had at that time. It was initially created through money that was donated, but eventually it was run on the basis of the businesses that we had, which brought in money, which enabled the centre to be improved, people to be employed, to teach, and so forth. So we can try to serve the Dharma through these institutions that we have created. So the final element that I want to talk about is communal lifestyle. We have a number of communities. I've already mentioned that here. We have 2 communities upstairs, 1 across the way, 3 communities round the corner. And I'm very pleased to hear a new community has been formed quite recently. So there are ways in which you can live with others who share your commitment to the Dharma, to Buddhism, and thereby go beyond your narrow self-identification. And my own experience of communities is that they're generally very, very positive situations. I'm staying in a community upstairs, right on the top floor, and it's a very happy community. It's very, very friendly, very relaxed, very funny, and very engaging. There's a lot of really good conversation. At the same time, there's a lot of play. It's a really positive environment, which is delightful to be participating in. And I'm very grateful to my hosts in the community upstairs, despite my abuse of them for their excessive coffee-making machines. But the community gives you the opportunity to give up yourself by engaging deeply with others. Give up yourself to some extent by engaging deeply with others who share your commitment and thereby enable you to encourage you to practice the Dharma. So I'm sorry to say this was a somewhat more prosaic evening. I'm not feeling at my very best tonight, but I hope I've communicated something of these factors that are behind the institutions that we have here. And these institutions are there to enable us to to activate these 5 different aspects. And if you want to, you can move into those institutions. You can move in as a volunteer, for instance. You can work in the Mandala Cafe if you want. You can come and help run the centre. And so you can begin to experience something of this, what we call semi-monastic environment, in which it's not a conventional environment, but it's not a fully monastic environment. It's a sort of hybrid. It's intermediate between them. You don't have to completely give up the world, but at the same time, you don't have to be completely embedded in the world. So I invite you, if you're not already participating in these sort of ways, to engage with this environment that we are trying to create, that we have created, and we're trying to develop and evolve. And I'm sure that if you do, you will quite quickly experience benefits. I've noticed this with even people just coming in to volunteer, to clean the centre or be on the reception desk or whatever. They feel they're participating in something that is out of the ordinary, that is different, and that is, in a way, you could say, truly radical. Because it's so easy, and it's becoming easier and easier, just to go along with conventional society. It's so easy just to live the life that everybody else lives. Actually, it's quite hard, but it's easy to do the hard thing, if you see what I mean, because it's what's expected, and it's supported. The whole of the structure of things is there to support that. And of course, there's so much wrong with it. It's so exploitative. It's so damaging to the environment. It's so alienating. You know, most people do not know their neighbours unless they live in certain places. There's a very strong disconnection between people. Very interesting. I just spent 2 months in Mexico, which is still much more traditional in its society. And coming back to England, I felt the space between people sort of increase. And I'd experienced in Mexico people really close. They don't do distance. And they're very puzzled by people like me, English people. They just don't do it. But here, this depends where you come from, what culture you come from, and so forth. But you could see the space between people, and there's so much of a sense of alienation and isolation. I read recently that a survey has shown that a huge number of young people, the majority of young people, feel lonely. It's terrible, terrible indictment on where we've got to. Loneliness is terrible. And then what to speak of old people? The loneliness of old people is a crime, is a shame, a crying shame. So we need to be trying to form community, where even if you don't live with others, you're deeply engaged with others in some common enterprise, so that we lessen this horrible tension that is growing in our society. I think Britain is probably one of the more extreme in this way. It depends, again, which community you come from, which background you come from. But as a whole, there's this a terrible sense of isolation, which is very, very common, and of course deepened by the COVID business, which intensified all of that. But I think we're at a serious crisis of alienation. And you cannot make spiritual progress from that alienated basis, because your spiritual life is just a compensation for your loneliness and for your isolation, for your alienation. We need to come into much closer relationship with each other and to live more vividly with each other. Families do something of that, but of course families now are so isolated. The nuclear family is now the predominant form, and they're not always very healthy. Quite often they're not very healthy. Whereas in Mexico, everybody's got cousins and so forth. India is even more like that. You live in a mesh of wider relationships. The families are not so isolated, although it's happening there too, happening all over the world, an epidemic of enucleation and therefore of isolation. And then, of course, we're even more isolated by the illusion of society that we get through our screens, which, yes, they do bring some contact and they can be effective. But on the whole, if we live through them, we're missing a deeper level of connection and communication. So we try to create situations in which that connection can be present. We create them if you just come along. Even this is an occasion for community, if you like. We're all attending to the same things. We're all drinking tea together, and so on. But we offer opportunities for deeper community, community through working together, and community opportunities through living together. That's what our semi-monastic institutions are about. They're about giving people the opportunity for deeper emotional connection with each other, and deeper, an energic connection. So we're actually in immediate connection of energy, which you can't be very easily through a screen. So I hope I've given you some idea of what these institutions are, why they exist, how they exist in relation to traditional monasticism, and how each of you, if you are interested in the Buddhist life, can be working on all these 5 elements. You can be working to overcome polarization, particularly sexual polarization, the polarity that goes with sex that's released by sexual encounter. The problems that arise from possessions, overcoming them, having more and less, more and more of less and less, so that you're less and less identifying yourself through what you own. And living a more and more simple life, which is easier to be aware of what's going on, easier to be in connection with others, living for the sake of something greater than yourself. If you're a Buddhist, living for the sake of the Dharma, serving the Dharma, and living a more communal life, being in closer connection with others through living and working together. So I hope that's been helpful to you. As I say, it's not quite as fiery and interesting as yesterday, but I hope I've outlined the issues to you sufficiently. Thank you very much.